Most of my subscribers at this point probably don't know this, but I was in the closet entirely as an atheist up until very recently. I was even in the closet when I started doing my channel full-time, as in I was a full-time atheist YouTuber, and most people still thought I was a Christian. Recently, I came out to everyone, and I wanted to share it all from the very beginning. Becoming an atheist. First, you've got to understand that I grew up very devout fundamentalist Christian. I was a leader in my church youth group, I went to conservative Christian college, and I believed it all fervently until my last semester in college. Up until the last couple of years, I'd never even had a good friend that wasn't Christian. In my last semester of college, fall of 2015, I began having doubts. I stopped believing in creationism and accepted evolution. I realized that being gay wasn't a choice, harmful, or wrong, and I accepted that the Bible actually had errors. Long story short, after realizing that I had all those doubts, I began questioning my beliefs intentionally while actually avoiding any non-Christian sources of information so that I knew that all my questions that I asked myself in that period would be entirely my own. After 4 months of that intense media blackout, I finally admitted to myself that I was no longer Christian. It was then early 2016. A bit later, I began thinking of myself as an agnostic atheist. This was all done in absolute secrecy. No one knew. I hinted at my doubts to my wife, who had a similar upbringing around this time, and soon after, I told her that I was an atheist. Honestly, up until the moment that I told her and she didn't freak out, I pretty much thought my life was over. From the time I secretly left Christianity, I thought I'd end up telling her, we'd get a divorce, I'd lose my job at the Christian homeless shelter I worked for, I'd have to move in with my parents, my relationship with them would be ruined, all my friends would find out, I'd lose all my friends, and end up broke and alone, if not actually homeless. But since things were fine between my wife and I after I deconverted, I felt like I had at least a little bit of hope for a decent life, even if I lost everyone else. After about a year of intense secrecy, I came out to my parents. It was a little bit better than expected, but it was still really difficult. I'll talk about the specific difficulties in coming out a bit later. Right after telling my parents, I started my channel, and it was just as a way to express my thoughts and contribute to the atheist community that had helped me a bit. Being an atheist activist in the closet. My longtime subscribers know this part of the story. I got really into making videos, gained a small following, and eventually started seeing it as a part-time job. At this point, it became really difficult to hide such a huge part of my life, and a couple of my friends found my channel. I made a video about that earlier this year. The few Christian friends that I have that wouldn't care very much even if they did know, I still don't want to tell because everyone I'm close to that knows has gotten dragged into covering up everything with me. My wife, my parents, even some coworkers. Those who I know that are clever enough that they will find out if we hang out, I've distanced myself from. I just haven't kept in contact with them over the past year or so. If you're watching this video and I haven't kept in contact with you after we were great friends, that's probably why. Recently, some really good friends of mine that I hadn't spoken to in about a year for that reason alone found my YouTube channel and messaged me about it. I immediately explained to them that I didn't want to burden them with helping me cover up who I am, and that's why I hadn't kept in touch. The awesome thing is that they understood completely and we can just pick up where we left off. But still, if they're hanging out with any of our mutual friends, they have to pretend that they don't know about me, and I hate that. Covering things up was incredibly taxing. I led people in prayer before meals. I occasionally went to church with my friends. Sorry guys, but I didn't really enjoy that very much. And I tore down my studio every single time people came over. I didn't want to become a pet project and I didn't want to lose friends, so it was worth it for a long time. But then in May of this year, I quit my job and went full-time on YouTube thanks to you guys. My wife and I then decided that it was no longer worth it to cover things up. Coming out. Here's where we get to recent events. We told my in-laws, and a few weeks later, all my friends who didn't already know. All of those people being as Christian as I used to be, by the way. Only a few people said they were actually surprised that I was an atheist. Most people said they had a suspicion because we didn't attend church or talk about anything spiritual anymore. A few others said that they had already actually found my channel and were just waiting for me to tell them. Now, I want to talk about the responses, but I also want to protect the privacy of everyone involved. So I've decided to discuss the responses categorically instead of naming any individuals. We'll start with the good and work our way to the negatives. Positive responses. I'm extremely lucky to be able to say that a lot of my close friends had very similar, loving responses. Most of them took a while to fully articulate it, but said that they didn't want anything to come between us and that they still cared about me just as much as before. That didn't come with any preaching vibes at all either, so that was just fantastic. Thanks, guys. It's obvious they care about me, and I'm extremely glad that didn't manifest in evangelism, because I don't think that would have done any good for any of us. The person who gave me my favorite response gave me permission to share it specifically, and it summed up in their line, "I love Drew for being Drew, not for being Christian." That sentiment is exactly what I think anyone coming out of the closet as anything wants to hear first and most. In coming out, I wasn't looking for agreement. I was just being honest and hoping no one would let it come between us. This person totally got that, and coming out to them, even though they're Christian, was actually a really, really good experience. I've hung out with almost everyone I recently came out to at least once since, and everything has been fine between us. Maybe some of my close friends have, but I haven't felt like our disagreements were the elephant in the room or anything, and that's something I was actually really afraid of beforehand. Actually, I moved just a couple days after I came out so that I could have a larger studio to do this, and nearly all of my close friends came to help me move and set up my studio. It was really incredibly supportive, and I'm so thankful of all of them for that. Mixed responses. I think the important thing to say here is that no response that had negative elements came without some positive ones. Luckily, no one has yelled at me or shut me out after I've come out to them. I still have functioning relationships with everyone I told. Also, just because any one person responded lovingly doesn't mean that things are perfect between us or that we'll never have difficulties. No one I told really approves of what I do or believe, which is okay. It just means that things could still be pretty tough in the future. Negative responses. If someone comes out to you in any capacity, the best thing you can do, like I said earlier, is to reassure them of how much you still care about and value them. Doing the opposite of this, fully rejecting them, is probably the worst thing you can do. However, simply failing to reassure them in your initial response is pretty bad too. I faced that in multiple cases. I'm glad these cases were in the minority for me, but they still happen, and some of them left me extremely hurt. I think the reason this is so hurtful is because I've been living in secrecy basically out of fear of hurting or losing people for 2 years. This has been difficult for me, and all I care about is having a healthy relationship with the people I've come out to. When things come to a turning point after my 2 years of anxiety over this, and someone else cares more to talk about what I've done wrong in their eyes than what we can do to both preserve our relationship, it makes me afraid that their priorities in our relationship are basically the opposite of my own. I understand that a lot of people prioritize their religion over their personal relationships because I used to think that way too. But I think a response that even just initially ignores that, hey, this is probably difficult to tell me, and he said he doesn't want to argue about it, is one that lacks empathy in a really problematic way. I'm sitting there on edge, waiting to see if we're going to be okay, but instead I get to hear about how wrong I am or how difficult I've made things as if I've done it on purpose. Now, the most common, somewhat negative aspect to any response I got was appealing to apologetics. I think the worst thing about that is that in coming out to anyone, I always made a point of saying that I didn't care to argue about the stuff with them, and that if they wanted any kind of debate, I'd like us both to consent to that conversation beforehand and then schedule a time to have it. That way, we wouldn't have spontaneous arguments that would end up hurting our relationship. When that request of mine has been respected, the ensuing conversations have been great. Most of the time, that request hasn't been respected when apologetics have been raised, though. It's almost always spontaneous and situationally unwelcome. Beyond that, the use of apologetics toward me, as I've experienced so far, have been, I guess in a word, fruitless. I'm open to changing my mind about Christianity, or anything for that matter, if I'm presented with sufficient evidence to warrant a reasonable change in beliefs. I care more about knowing the truth than holding to any of my current positions. That said, I know apologetics, especially Christian ones, very well, and I've not yet once come out to anyone only to hear them use an apologetic that I have not yet studied in depth and could dismantle immediately without requiring any further research. I honestly hate saying that, and that's why I haven't responded to anyone with that statement before. To use the level of apologetics that I've encountered in these conversations is to assume that I've never actually studied the most basic of theistic or Christian arguments. I have, in great depth. By the time anyone I knew in real life raised any of these apologetics against me, I had already known their flaws for years, and had others use them against me before dozens of times to no avail. From a lot of different people, I've heard, just read this book, just listen to this person, just consider this argument, just go to this apologetics website. The issue is, I've read every one of those books. I've listened to every one of those people. I've considered every one of those arguments, and I've been to every one of those apologetic websites. This is no exaggeration. None of it has been new to me yet. Like I said, I'm totally willing to change my mind for good reason, but even replying to anyone with just how remedial these apologetics are to me at this point would come off rude and arrogant in spontaneous conversation. So I'm just not interested in even having those conversations. Lastly, I consider it a negative when someone is saddened when I come out to them, and that's probably everyone I've ever come out to who's been close to me. This used to be the number one thing that bothered me about coming out, and it really prevented me from coming out for a long time. But I've come to see that there's nothing I can do to control that. I think it's understandable on their part given their beliefs, and I'll always have empathy for that, but I have to realize that it's their burden to bear. I can't make it my own like I did for so long. 2 years ago, I never would have guessed that one day I'd be openly atheist, have a happy and healthy marriage, have my dream job, and still have all of my Christian friends and family who I love. I've been lucky. I know people in the developed world who have lost their marriages, lost their jobs, lost all their friends, and probably worst of all, lost their children just for coming out as an atheist. Just recently, a subscriber of mine actually told me that his lawyer said that he may lose his court case for custody of his child because he's an atheist. This discrimination is real, and it's everywhere. If you're in the closet, that's okay. A lot of us have good reasons for it. But I urge you to seek out a community of like-minded people, even just online, to help you cope. I needed that, and I bet that you do too. I also encourage you to look into going to a secular therapist near you. You can find support through the Secular Therapy Project and the Recovering from Religion Foundation, links in the description. If you're openly secular, though, please do your best to make things better for those who haven't been able to come out yet. Normalize atheism by humanizing atheists in the eyes of others. I'm finally out in the open. My work is just getting started. Thanks for watching. I've been Drew of Genetically Modified Skeptic. Thanks to everyone who has helped me in my long journey to finally coming out. There are too many people to thank here personally, but you all know who you are. Thank you. As always, praise be unto Adam, my top patron and personal Lord and Savior, for making this video possible. Go ahead and subscribe, check out my Patreon, follow me on Twitter and Facebook at GM Skeptic, and until next time, stay skeptical.